Round 2 of the Stanley Cup playoffs is set between the Edmonton Oilers and the Vancouver Canucks. Welcome to the panel presented by Sportsnet. I'm Paige Martin, joined by Bob Stauffer and Jack Michaels. And Jack, let's start with you. A little bit of a recap from round 1. What did you like about what you saw through the first 5 games from the Edmonton Oilers?
Well, the biggest thing I liked is that Edmonton shortened the series and reduced the wear and tear on its hockey club, not just in that series, but maybe moving forward. It's something that may pay tangible benefits in, say, a month or so. I mean, you got to get there first, but I think unlike a team like the Boston Bruins or unlike even the Vancouver Canucks, who created an additional 10 hours of flight time for themselves, Edmonton was able to shorten that series, put LA away, and from a win-loss perspective, not allow the Kings to hang around. Because absolutely, if Edmonton had let Game 5 get away, not only do you bring travel into play, but you also simplify things for the Kings in the sense of let's just win one home game, and now anything can happen in a Game 7. Edmonton took all those variables out of play. Special teams was outstanding, but I thought defensively, I thought Edmonton, for the most part, boxed LA out in that series. I'm not going to take anything away from Stuart Skinner. He had to make the saves he had to make. But also, I think Stuart Skinner played the way he's expected to play. He's not just some rookie anymore. He's a legitimate player in this league, and I think had more goals gone in against him, he would have been disappointed because I thought Edmonton kept the quality of the shots low despite the fact that at times the volume was high. So they effectively boxed LA out in this series, not only physically, but I think psychologically, getting that win in Game 3 to reassert control of the series.
Bob, maybe I'll ask you kind of what Jack just touched on about Stuart Skinner and the growth that we've seen from him. We've seen the same thing exemplified by Vinny Desharnais and just the maturity of this group as a whole.
Yeah, well, we'll start with, both those guys were in the ECHL 5 years ago. In Stuart's case, I have a fair amount of confidence because of the work ethic that he has, that he's, going to continue to work on his overall craft. And but I do want to hit on a couple things that Jack alluded to. First of all, for me, the team defense is better. What separated and differentiated Edmonton's, winning the series in 5, and Jack's 100, and he sort of inferred that when we did our panel to start the playoffs, that he thought that this may be an easier series for Edmonton. Well, I'm not sure it was an easier series in terms of, hey, they might have had a little bit better team. Well, they didn't have Drew Doughty 2 years ago, and they won 7 games against Edmonton. But I think we saw maturation with the Oilers as a whole, far better defensive structure and process in their game. And that shouldn't be as a surprise because they've been 5th in the league in goals against since Chris Knoblauch took over. Way more discipline. They didn't take one bad penalty. And when we think of the games against Vancouver this year, and you might just throw those games out the window, but the reality is the 2 games in Vancouver, the Oilers took a lot of dumb penalties. And they sort of lost their way a bit. And to the point that I even had officials commenting to me about how calm the Oilers bench was, how mature the team was on the ice, and they're like, this is a good team. And they should be mature. When they picked up Adam Henrique and Sam Carrick in the trade with Anaheim, they became the oldest team in the NHL. So I think there's a lot to be positive about, and Jack nailed it. The biggest thing is they got it done in 5, and I think that can bode well for you carrying forward in the playoffs.
To tack on Bob's maturation process, and he alluded to the goals
against.
My
specific maturation process?
Well, Bob's come a long way in the last 15 years. But, Bob touched on the fact that the goals against had come down under Chris Knoblauch. I think the whole temperature of the team came down. Bob talked about those 2 losses in Vancouver, and there were a ton of undisciplined penalties where the Oilers seemed to come unglued, considering it was only a month of the season. Well, look at Chris Knoblauch's press conferences. And, at first I was thinking, boy, that's a great public facade he's got. Then I talked to him privately. I'm like, wow, that's a great private facade he's got. And then I saw him talking to random people in conversation. I'm like, wow, that's a great random private conversation facade he's got. He has brought the entire temperature of the team down. His calm demeanor has carried over to the leaders on this club who, quite frankly, needed it. They needed a push in that direction because I believe the entire Oiler group was unsettled about the way this season started. Perhaps understandably so, but it didn't help. And it's just like, Bob and I, when we get frazzled, it rarely helps the situation. And I think that's more than anything what Chris Knobloch brought to this team. A sense of calm, a sense of chill. Hey, everything's going to be okay. Just play.
Like Paige, the Oilers ended up 20 power plays. LA only had 12. LA took a couple dumb penalties. Edmonton didn't. LA probably didn't get beneficial calls, and certainly Game 3, you can argue, and in Game 5 a couple times. But at the end of the day, I'm wondering whether or not Edmonton's maybe seen a little bit different because their guy's under control behind the bench, and the team is under control. Even when stuff, like think of what happened with Evander Kane in Game 3. Like, he got blown up in that hit. And to his credit, he went right back at England, challenged them. But there were other hits in that game earlier that weren't called, and he didn't lose his you-know-what on borderline plays. And I'm wondering whether or not that would have happened at the start of the year. So I think those are some of the things that have helped, the Edmonton Oilers ease. It wasn't easy, but they got through the series in 5, and now they got a real good challenge coming up.
They're going to need that sense of calm as they enter round 2, especially against the Vancouver Canucks. The regular season, we know, favored the Canucks against the Edmonton Oilers. What needs to be different for the Oilers? And maybe it's some of the stuff that you guys have already touched upon when it comes to defense, the maturation of this group, that they need to apply in this round 2 series to be successful.
Well, look, a couple of years ago, Edmonton won, I think, 6 in a row against Winnipeg. And at the time, we thought that meant something because it was closer to the start of the playoffs. That whole year was condensed in the bubble and with no fans, and those 6 victories were relatively recently. The only thing about Vancouver's record against Edmonton this year that you kind of, how relevant is it was 6 months ago. I mean, that's an eternity. And I just think the Oilers were in a vastly different place. That's not to take – Vancouver pulverized Edmonton in the 2 home wins in particular. They took them apart, and they took them apart not just physically, but they got in their kitchen and rattled them mentally. But this is a different club coached by a different man who has – I think served as a bit of a blueprint for the entire team to follow in terms of composure. Now, you're going to say, well, what about the end of the season? Well, there was no Connor McDavid. And I don't know. Bob may have disagreed with me on this, but I said it on the air during the game. I felt like it was a restrained performance by the Oilers. Not that they didn't necessarily want to win, but I don't know. It just felt like we're not putting all our cards on the table just yet. In other words, I honestly believe Vancouver hasn't seen Edmonton's best. Now, it's completely fair to point out Casey DeSmith beat the Oilers twice too, so they didn't have Thatcher Demko. Well, it doesn't look like they're going to have Thatcher Demko in this series either. And if they want to go ahead and play Archer Shelovs in the games, if Demko is unavailable, well, if I'm Edmonton, I'm going to take my chances. I think Edmonton's a different animal than the Nashville Predators. I'm not taking anything away from what Vancouver has done. They earned the division title. They've got the absolute stone-cold mortal lock as head coach of the year in Rick Tocchet. And I think Vancouver, in winning a playoff round as well, has solidified and justified that regular season. But if you think that it's going to be a 4-0 Vancouver result because it was a 4-0 Vancouver result in the regular season, I have to take issue with that.
Yeah, I find it interesting. Just on the goaltending, I mean, we saw the video yesterday of Thatcher Demko. Who knows, right? Like, Shelovs, it was really good last year at the Worlds. I haven't seen him a lot.
Yeah. And if Demko plays, it's a different series.
Right, it is. I got to be honest with you. I was stunned that Vancouver didn't dominate territorial play more against Nashville. Like, I mean, they had the lowest shots through the first 4 games in a playoff series in NHL history. I was taken aback because I think Vancouver's got a real good team. I think, like...
Well, you and I would have been saying the same thing about Nashville. It's not fair to gauge Edmonton-Nashville because the Oilers didn't see the Preds at their best, and at their best, as Bob says, they gave Vancouver trouble.
Well, even after trading away, like, they kind of did a little bit of a mini teardown like Nashville did. And so at the end of the day, the Canucks have some pretty good forwards that were quiet against Nashville 5-on-5. Edmonton's 5-on-5 numbers against LA they're not what they came out as. In terms of, you look at the goal differential, it was even, but LA got 4 really fluky goals in that series that kind of changed the tenor and tone 5-on-5. I know that Rick Tocchet's already spoken, well, we got to take care of special teams, but my expectation is Edmonton will be highly competitive 5-on-5 against Vancouver as well. The Oilers have their higher end's pretty good, and Edmonton's built an underlay of good support players. Both teams have bigger defenses. I mean, that's the other thing Vancouver did. They were relentless in their pursuit to improve the team, but their D has completely transformed itself from 2 years ago.
And they've got one of the 3 best defensemen in the world.
Yeah, who's a dynamic player. Is their one smaller guy, but they got some big bodies back there that can lay into you. I think it's going to be a fun series. One thing I will say, there's a difference between playing in Nashville and LA. It's not the same as playing in a Canadian market. The heat will be equal in both markets on the respective teams. Like, you know, some people say, well, the pressure's on all in Edmonton. What are you talking about? The pressure's on Vancouver team. This is a city that's rioted twice when they lost. Like, they care about their team. They're passionate as well. So it's going to be on, and it's going to be fun.
Well, you mentioned it's going to be fun, Bob. It's always fun standing next to you and Jack as well, guys. Thank you so much. Hey, absolutely.
She said that with a straight face.
I
Zoom
mean
in. Check it.
I fully mean it. This is the panel presented by Sportsnet. Round 2's underway this week. The Vancouver Canucks and the Edmonton Oilers.